Welcome to the 13th episode of Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined as always by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński. Hello, Michał.
It's great to see you. We are still in full coronavirus lockdown, although some measures of security are already being eased, so we already decided that our next episode will be recorded live since we are both in Warsaw, Poland. But now hopefully the final episode that we are recording through Skype. I'm in one part of Warsaw and Sebastian is in another. We are only few subway stops away, but it's the sign of the times that we are recording this in a fashion like this. And today we will discuss a film that I find very exciting, a film that was quite divisive in Hitchcock scholarship. Some people dismissed it, some people praised it, probably too much, excessively.
A bit too eagerly, yes.
But certainly an odd beast and an interesting case and a surprising entry in Hitchcock's filmography, which is Rich and Strange, a film that premiered in December 1931, a film based on a novel by Dale Collins, an Australian-born a novelist, something of an odd case, and we will discuss this in a second. Basically, I would say a comedy, a marriage comedy of the sort that we will find again in Hitchcock's filmography, for example, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But this film comes immediately after the adaptation of stage play by John Goldsworthy, which we discussed last time. That was The Skin Game. And this film is strikingly different in tone. I will just briefly summarize the plot so that we have it out of the way and then we can discuss it. Basically, the plot is quite simple. A marriage, a working class marriage of a clerk and a housewife, I guess. At some point, they are extremely bored with their tedious and predictable lives. And the husband expresses a wish for their life to change dramatically, for finally to experience life. And they inherit money, a sudden inheritance that comes out of nowhere, that is basically like this deus ex machina, enables them to undertake a long and exciting journey, first to France, then to the East Seas, and to exotic countries, and experience possible affairs. Husband and wife both have sort of an affair, extramarital affair, and then come back to one another aboard a ship that crashes. We'll discuss it later on. But basically, they remarry in a way. Through this crisis, they end up remarried. So we have this common plot of remarriage that's basically rooted in Shakespeare and stuff. So we have a story of a marriage, basically a marriage comedy with some exotic elements, right?
Yes, that's correct. And the very title of the film is rooted in Shakespeare, actually, right? It's a quote from The Tempest, Hitchcock's exotic play. So it suits the movie very well. Yes, it's a very interesting film. I must say that I saw it twice within the last few days. There are two reasons for that. First is that I had a very nice DVD copy, but without English subtitles. And as you mentioned previously, these early sound films by Hitchcock and early sound movies generally, and especially British, I would say, are quite hard for us as foreigners to comprehend fully, right? You get 70-80% of the dialogue at best. So, but it was visually very good. And then I also decided to rewatch it with English subtitles on Amazon Prime. But also I wanted to see it once again because I was, maybe not amazed, but I was really fascinated by some of Hitchcock's choices, by some of the jokes, the structure of the whole thing. As you mentioned, it's an odd beast. It's a strange movie, but it's really enjoyable even nowadays. And I would say it's one of the most contemporary Hitchcock British movies. In this way that the very premise of the movie, the very beginning, so a couple that is bored with their ordinary lives The beginning is, as many scholars suggest, inspired or imitating King Vidor's The Crowd, right? So his famous silent movie, which begins with this amazing overhead traveling shot. We see rows of desks of working men, people working in offices. So here we have a similar shot, also quite ingeniously designed by Hitchcock, because it's just one shot which shows us the hero who's leaving his office, going home, and we see the whole the several rooms, and we see other people working there, and it's all done in one shot, and we get this feeling that it's a crowd of people who just have these bureaucratic lives. So the very beginning is that they want to experience something different. They want to break the routine and maybe look for some adventure. And I find it contemporary. I was reminded of Albert Brooks' Lost in America, for example, which I know it's one of your favorite movies. It's a great movie indeed, American movie from the 1980s, and this film is a bit similar. I wouldn't say that it's a perfect early Hitchcock movie. I think it has many flaws, but they make the whole thing even more interesting. For example, the uneven cast. There are some actors that you feel are in a good place and that they deliver good performances. Like Joan Barry, for example, the main heroine. I find her performance pretty good. But of course, the main protagonist, Fred Hill, played by Henry Kendall, I wouldn't say it's a good performance, and also the way Hitchcock characterizes him is pretty unfavorable. He's not a nice guy. He's not someone that we would identify with. So we get this portrait of a maybe failed or threatened masculinity. It becomes more and more visible in the latter parts of the movie. So there are many interesting things to look at, I would say, when it comes to Rich and Strange.
Absolutely, yes, the title is Shakespearean. I would agree with what you are saying. Well, the lack of chemistry between Henry Kendall and Joan Barry is quite apparent. By the way, we have already heard Joan Barry in Hitchcock's films. She was the actress who provided the English voice in the sound version of Blackmail. So here we can both hear and see her, and she is quite funny. It's this sort of almost like this crazy screwball comedy heroine, and it's not a surprise that in Hitchcock's later take on this, let's say, genre of screwball, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the female part will be played by Carole Lombard, who was one of the beloved crazy ladies of screwball comedy. So here, this one is also a bit ditzy, as they used to say. So she's definitely more vivacious than the guy. Hitchcock himself rather cruelly blamed the lack of chemistry between them on Henry Kendall's supposed homosexuality. I didn't double check that information, but this is what Hitchcock said in an interview. The interesting thing about this literary source, which apparently is nearly impossible to get nowadays unless you have access to extremely good libraries. It's out of print and basically out of sight, this Dale Collins source. It's funny because for years before Charles Barr's book, English Hitchcock, people assumed that, this book either didn't exist, which actually is there's this funny video introduction to the DVD of Rich and Strange with French scholar Noel Simsolo, who says that, Dale Collins probably didn't exist, and
yes, that was very funny.
Well, he did exist, and moreover, he was a successful writer. His most famous work was Ordeal, which has a similar plot. And the book, apparently, of course, I haven't read it, but Charles Barr did, and the book apparently is identical to the film. There was a possible idea that maybe Hitchcock actually had a hand in creating this book, that it was a fruit of their conversations, Collins and Hitchcock. So maybe those two things were basically born simultaneously. So far, we don't know what was the case, but apparently the book and the film are very, very close. So that's one thing one thing to remember.
Yes, and I think McGilligan kind of expands this theory and suggests that the production of the movie was a bit postponed, and in the meantime, Dale Collins wrote this book based on the conversations with both Alma Reville and Alfred Hitchcock, and so that's in this way, as you mentioned, it's kind of appeared simultaneously, but McGilligan suggests that the idea for the movie was first. So I think so. This Hitchcock biographer suggests that it's not a straight adaptation. So it's a bit confusing, and it adds up to the maybe not a mystery, but some exotic dimension of the movie.
Absolutely, and I love your comparison to Lost in America. It's a longer tradition of this rejuvenation of a marriage through complete change, and I would say that for me what was striking was this another appearance of exotic themes that we saw in Hitchcock's The Pleasure Garden, which was made a couple of years before, and we covered it in our first episode. The whole idea of the East and of the exotic world and of the confrontation of a Western couple with the mysterious and orientalized East here is also present, so that was quite interesting. And for me, probably the most interesting thing about both Lost in America and Rich and Strange is that it is the male character who initiates the journey. At the beginning, both women who are, both in Lost in America and Rich and Strange, are quite comfortably ensconced in the domestic sphere. It's very important. It's a childless domestic sphere. So we see Joanne Barry actually sewing on a sewing machine on her table, and she doesn't seem restless. It's not like she's complaining about this situation. It's the man who is complaining. His sense of adventure is not being nourished, and it's funny that both in the book and in the film he points to a print, to a photo, a picture of a ship in the middle of the sea as this sort of signifier of male adventure, that I'm here stuck behind the desk, I'm the slave of the office, and the real adventure would be to sail down the sea and to be a sailman. A sailor. That's interesting because when you remember Rare Window and this tension between L.B. Jeffries and his fiancée, it's exactly the same situation. The guy wants to travel, he wants to take photos in exotic locations, he wants to experience the adrenaline rush of putting himself in harm's way. Whereas the woman tends to be domestic and she wants to, even if there is no talk of children, then, she wants to create this small nest for them in Greenwich Village. And also L.B. Jeffries had on his wall pictures of his own adventures, of the pictures he took. So they were there to remind that, somewhere there is this more exciting life, which I will completely lost if I, decide to start this domesticized relationship with Grace Kelly. So I find it interesting, and probably also something of Hitchcock's own dreams, to lead this exciting life of adventure. For him, this adventure came true with the conquest of Hollywood, I would say.
These are great points. I totally agree with you. The comparison with Rear Window is awesome. So just let me add two things. Also, I think we didn't mention the American title of this movie, which doesn't make sense, right? East of Shanghai, but we know that the protagonists do not go that far. They never even, reach Shanghai, and they certainly do not reach anywhere near to east of Shanghai. So that's funny when you kind of add it to this Dale Collins as the author confusion. So it makes this movie as this kind of nonsense exercise in a way. And that's totally true. I found a fascinating observation in Ken Mogg's essay on Hitchcock's literary sources. It's an essay from the Hitchcock Companion, not published quite recently, and he writes there that Hitchcock's favorite literary heroine was Madame Bovary. And when we add to what you said, when we added to this idea that the life is so boring that we must do something, of course, in case of Flaubert's heroine, she's a woman, and that's more complementary to the general cultural narratives, right? Because in Rear Window we have 1950s, so the era of suburban domesticity. Of course, we are in New York, but basically in that era, women were the members of society that could suffer because of this domesticity, and often suffered also psychologically, right? Nowadays we have pretty straightforward movies about that, like Revolutionary Road by Sam Mendes. This idea that women were relegated to the home sphere, and they didn't have any adventure at all besides washing dishes and stuff like that. So it sounds terrible, right? But in Hitchcock we have the reverse. The men are bored with life, and this comparison with Bovary I think is really interesting, because it suggests that many Hitchcock's protagonists, and actually Ken Mock mentions Rich and Strange in that context, are kind of provoking their adventures, right? Like L.B. Jeffries in Rear Window, in a way also Roger O. Thornhill in North by Northwest. They have this steady life, these maybe, L.B. Jeffries doesn't, but now he has. When we see him in the movie, he just, he's thirsty for any kind of adventure. So there is this persistent theme in Hitchcock that we need to break with our routine and maybe look for something interesting. So if we trace it back to Madame Bovary, it's really interesting. It makes Hitchcock's cinema, maybe it gives him this literary pedigree that maybe we wouldn't suppose at the beginning. I think it's a bit surprising.
That's a great trope. I never read this essay that you mentioned, but it seems very interesting. And the main difference, of course, between Roger Thornhill, L.B. Jeffries, and Fred from Rich and Strange is that the first two are bachelors, and they don't suffer from the tedium of domesticity. They are either single, or they don't commit to living with their partner, like Jeffries. So they preserve this romance of bachelorhood, which is especially in a place like Greenwich Village, in Rear Window, is extremely exciting. And this is why L.B. Jeffries doesn't want to relinquish his freedom, because the marriage equals death, basically. And here we are in a married couple. And as we know, Hitchcock was married at that time to Alma Reville already, and he had a 4-year-old daughter, Patricia. Noel Simsolo actually makes a big point about the couple's childlessness. That this is the basic dramatic problem in the film.
Do you agree with that? I also saw this video, and I was thinking about it when I was watching the movie for the second time.
Well, I would agree with that. Hitchcock by then was bound by both marriage and fatherhood, and he never experienced that freedom that he grants his characters in this film. So on some level, I think he was always about breaking away from those ties. About having this fantasy of an intense romantic and sexual relationship that will morph into vertigo and even frenzy in a way.
Vertigo, another certified bachelor, right?
Yes, absolutely. Again, James Stewart. So here it's the marriage. It's but I find it interesting that the guy is the one who points to the picture, right? He says, this is the life, how life should look like, and but for me, the strangest, richest and strangest part of the film comes definitely on the ship, when they wake up and suddenly the ship is deserted. It's there has been some kind of a crash. the ship is deserted. It's like a surrealist scene, and many scholars connect this film to surrealism because it's like a nightmare. First they're seasick, like we know Alma and Hitchcock were on their honeymoon. So there's this queasiness, then this whole, let's say, extramarital affairs, and then they wake up and the ship is empty. It's like a David Lynch film. They could literally totally. And then the incredible scenes with the mysterious Chinaman. One of them dies in front of our eyes. Then there's this incredible scene when we always analyze Hitchcock's relationship to food. This is the only, I think, film in which he allowed people to eat with their hands. They are eating with their hands the rice with meat, so they are like babies, they are like infants, dabbling with food in a almost Freudian way. And then they discover that probably what they ate is a cat, because they see the skin of a cat. So it's like this primary nightmare. What did I just eat? What it was that I scooped with my hand and why eat. So it's a crazy film, and this is why I like it, because Hitchcock does things here that I think he will never do again in his films, just to make film totally nonsensical in such a free way.
Exactly, I totally agree. I think it's a nonsensical film, and let's just say that they have a black cat at home. So that they have a real cat in London, and then they encounter this stray black cat on a ship, and yes, as you mentioned, they see it, they just see the skin of this cat put to the wall. I think that, yes, it's a nightmare, but let's also say that they go through this kind of purification. They are purified after this whole experience. So in the first part of the movie, their marriage is at stake and their marriage is threatened, but then their life is threatened. So we have this kind of, like in these jokes, that if you feel your apartment is too small, just get a goat into the apartment for a week, and then after the goat will be gone, you will realize, wow, it's so much space here. So it's similar here. So they think they have some problems, right? Actually, it's not explored convincingly, I would say. Their marital relationship is not really convincing. It's not the level of sophistication and detail that we'll have in screwball comedies, right? I would say. But yeah, they have this extramarital affairs, and both of these affairs are not really... I mean, we know as viewers, I think, from the very beginning that nothing will come out of it, right? I mean, the main protagonist, the man, Henry, right? Henry is his name. He needs like almost an hour to realize that this princess is a false princess. We know it from the very beginning, from the very first moment. And also we may assume that this bachelor, this older man that is more and more interested in the character of John Barry, will also go his own way after all, right? So we know these are not promising adventures for them. And then they realize that, it's really... So the whole movie is in fact this reaffirmation of British domesticity, right? It's very, very palpable towards the end that they are very happy to come back to their steak and kidney pudding, right? So at the beginning, the Henry is fed up with this dish, because he eats it like almost every day. And it's when we talk about food, it's another important element in this movie. Then when he's seasick, there is this incredible, almost like silent era movie shot with the menu, and these names of dishes are popping up, because he's seasick and he cannot eat anything, and he's just fed up with all of that. I think it's also interesting when we think about Hitchcock's taste and his taste in food. And then they suddenly after this horrible adventure, everything seems nice to them. So that's one thing. So they are, in a way, they are purified, but I would say the very end of the movie is very ambiguous. It's ambiguous in a way that some screwball comedies are. So on the one hand, they are remarried symbolically, right? They come back to their house, but before they witness the birth of a child on this Chinese junk ship, right? And their reactions are quite different. The woman, she's amazed and she wants to help in the process, and she's fascinated by that. And the Henry is more withdrawn. He I think he considers children as kind of nasty, or not important at all. He even mentions that we have ourselves, we so saying something like, we don't need this child. But then he also, there is this 3 seconds when he realizes that this father is very proud, to have this child, and so maybe he will also be proud. But the ending doesn't really tell us if they decided to have a child, because there is a quarrel about the apartment, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, the later on in Hitchcock's films, the issues of paternity will be much more important, and the issues of family, like in Shadow of a Doubt, for example. So we will see that later on. But here I would say that first of all, we forgot to mention that this movie is also both sound and silent, because it does use intertitles in a way that are redolent of silent cinema. And I would agree with what you are saying. Also, it has this incredible similarity to some stories that Hitchcock himself said about going to Berlin and being shocked by sexual behavior there. So here the British couple is shocked by the sexual behavior in Paris. Apparently Hitchcock and Alma also went to Folies Bergère, and Hitchcock describes a lesbian scene that he witnessed again. So he already described the lesbian scenes that he saw in Berlin. So this is something clearly that he was fascinated with. And here they are scared, but also in relations to class, because they are definitely anxious about, revealing that they are not familiar with the upper class behavior. When they walk through the foyer, the hall of the hotel, they walk very quietly and timidly, because they feel they don't belong there. Even though they have this money they won in the lottery, they don't belong in this upper echelon world. So this is definitely something that Hitchcock was undergoing himself as a son of a shopkeeper who later on in his life will associate with the most refined and aristocratic strata of Anglo-Saxon society. So this is something that he definitely felt himself. So yeah, in general, I would say that this is an adventurous film. It's funny, it's weird, it's surprisingly deep. Not the masterpiece that some people claim it to be, like Chabrol and Romer, who said basically that it's perfect and it was so underrated because it's such a clear vision. I don't think it's a clear vision. I think that Hitchcock didn't know what he was doing much. At the end of the novel, the characters meet their own creator. At the end of the film, supposedly Hitchcock also wanted to include a scene in which he meets his characters and talks to them and says that, oh, this story that you just told me wouldn't make a good movie at all. Apparently, we don't know if it was shot or it was just edited out of the film, this scene, so there is no Hitchcock cameo here in this film. But overall, I would say that yes, it's one of the freest, strangest exercises in Hitchcock's filmography. So I would rate it quite highly in my canon.
Yes, I agree. And you mentioned the Chabrol and Romer book, and you can. There is now. I want to tell something to our listeners. You can go to our fan page, and there is a quote from that book posted if you're interested. And yes, they consider it a great movie. And I was just thinking that when you look once again towards Hollywood, then you realize that at the same time, when it comes to exotic adventures, you have, of course, Joseph von Sternberg's movies like Morocco and the Shanghai Express, by the way. So then you realize that there is, a huge gap between British film industry and Hollywood, of course. So it's hard to look at this film with similar expectations that we look at Sternberg's movies, which were technically perfect, which were aesthetically perfect, and also nonsense in a beautiful way. So that's certainly not the same level. And I agree that this movie is just so strange, and it sometimes it feels that the plot was developing as they were shooting that. There is this feeling that it starts in London, then they go to Paris, and then suddenly they go to these strange places. Then suddenly these affairs are important. Then there is this shipwreck, and I think shipwreck and ships in general, this is something that Hitchcock was interested in and maybe couldn't explore as much as he wanted. Right, one of his unreleased project was, I think, connected with shipwreck, with showing that. So that's all pretty interesting. And also this, I just want to add that I was also reminded of the second version of The Man Who Knew Too Much and the Morocco scenes, this theme of Europeans in this so-called exotic locations. We probably in 2020 we should choose a better word to describe these non-European places. But there is this feeling that it's also space for these white people, to kind of explore themselves. And of course, there are some jokes that we would consider offensive nowadays. There is this joke with this Chinese servant who enters the room in a hotel all the time, and they just shout at him, and it's like this comic relief, and it doesn't really look good nowadays. But of course, that's part of this era, and that's part of the pleasure of looking at these old movies. So yes, so a strange beast, as you mentioned, but really, I think we should recommend to all our listeners, because it's one of the more interesting early sound Hitchcock movies.
Absolutely, fully agreed. I also thought of the second version of The Man Who Knew Too Much, and only by then the couple is American, not European. That's the difference, because Hitchcock also became an American, so that's the real transformation. And of course they have a child, so that's the major difference, that the whole plot actually will revolve around the child being kidnapped and restoring the family unit. But absolutely, that post-colonial jokes that are there, or actually colonial, are quite unsavory to see today, and Hitchcock was definitely guilty of that, a slightly jingoistic approach. So I'm glad that we both liked it. We recommend it to our listeners, and thank you so much for joining the podcast again. And please visit our fan page on Facebook, Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock, and please follow us on Spotify, iTunes. Please do review us on iTunes if you are following us there. And do spread the word. This is a non-profit podcast that we are purely, that's developed purely for pleasure and hopefully for pleasure of all of our listeners. So thank you so much for listening, and see you soon at Foreign Correspondence
Deeper into Hitchcock.